Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargav. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. With the real-time and online sharing of taxpayer data between the Income Tax Department and the GST Department and vice versa, the detection of tax evasion by the government has become much more quicker and easier of late. It is all about sharing and spotting incriminating data on a concurrent basis, and that is what these departments now do. To detect tax evasion, the Income Tax Department thus does not need to wait for the year end for the taxpayers to file their financial statements and the ITR and then see it. That is a kind of a post-mortem exercise where the tax evasion is found much after the crime has been committed, and maybe by then the tax evaded money and its maker have both vanished, making recovery of taxes very difficult. Under the present data sharing, a continued mismatch between the two databases, that is, of the GSTN and of the Income Tax Department, is enough to raise a red flag, such as to trigger a probe by these departments, which may finally culminate into an income tax or a GST raid. It's not only the Income Tax Department and the GST data that is shared and matched, but many others are also done. A matching of data is done, cross-verification is done, which includes data related to suspicious banking transactions, related to credit card transactions, information related to purchase of property and investments, cash payments, etc., which are all verified online and on a real-time basis in order to spot tax evasion and at times to catch the culprits red-handed. Armed with such live data and muscular tax laws, an empowered Income Tax Department has been hyperactive of late. That explains the record number of income tax searches that have taken place during this financial year, and they continue to do so. Incidentally, the most frequently reported tax raids these days are those on the political opponents of the ruling party who, because of their own murky dealings of the past, are sitting ducks for the taxman today. These are the raids that hit the headlines most of the time nowadays, the latest being on the ministers of the Maharashtra government and on their relatives, business associates, favored contractors, and on their money managers. These unremitting tax and ED raids in Maharashtra led to the outburst of the Maharashtra Chief Minister recently on the floor of its legislative assembly, where he said that arrest me, but stop harassing my relatives by these tax raids. Of course, they will continue, and the departments remain hyperactive, as we say. From a pure tax perspective, these raids on politicians have generally been very successful, but being politically motivated, they carry the tag of political vendetta and witch hunting, and that's because the ruling party politicians who are not clean either are rarely subjected to tax raids, and it is mostly those in the opposition who face tax raids and ED inquiries. In this season of rampant tax raids on political opponents and on the critics of the BJP, the recent income tax raid on Hero MotoCorp, which happens to be the biggest two-wheeler manufacturer in the world since 2001, with operations in over 40 countries, the raid on Hero MotoCorp stands out as one actually meant to detect tax evasion and not fix any political opponents of the ruling party. The reports say that the Income Tax Department conducted an extensive search at the numerous premises of Hero MotoCorp, as also at the residence of its chairman and CEO, Mr. Pawan Munjal, and its other senior executives. The fact that even personal residences were raided means it's a serious action. The nationwide search was conducted at dozens of locations last week, and this action continues. The Income Tax Department is reported to have seized a large amount of business and personal records, laptops, digital data, etc., and it has also recorded many statements in what looks to be a case of systematic, large-scale tax evasion by the company. The company issued a statement in the aftermath of the start of the raid itself to say that its premises and residences were raided by the Income Tax Department and that it is only a routine inquiry, which it claims is not unusual at the end of a financial year. In its statement, the company assured all its stakeholders that it is business as usual, and that Hero MotoCorp is an ethical and law-abiding corporate which maintains the highest standards of ethical corporate governance, and that it is keeping with this philosophy that it is extending its fullest cooperation to the tax authorities. Well, that is what the company says, but what has been emanating out of these raids and the reports that are coming unofficially are completely different. The tax raids on Hero MotoCorp are actually said to have taken place due to an unusual mismatch in the GST and income tax data, and also due to intelligence inputs received by the income tax department against the company and against some of its senior officials. The sources in the income tax department refuted the company's claims of it being a law-abiding corporate, or that the raid was just some kind of a routine year-end inquiry, which they said is not so. They said that the income tax raids on the company were triggered by a mismatch between its income declared as per its income tax data and information which was gathered from other sources, primarily, of course, the GST sources. Such information about Hero MotoCorp had been shared by the GST with the income tax department some time back, and the mismatches between the two had led to the start of a probe against the company. It is certainly not some kind of a routine year-end inquiry, as it says. The tax officials claim that the income tax department had solid evidence to start the investigation, with multiple mismatch and gaps being found in the income data of the company. While the company dismissed the income tax raids as a routine business as usual, the latest reports now say that a systematic and massive tax evasion has been found during the course of the income tax raids, which include bogus expenses being booked of over 1,000 crore rupees. They include an unaccounted purchase of a farmhouse on the outskirts of Delhi for over rupees 100 crores. It includes huge personal expenses being found, accommodation entries taken, etc. The company has dismissed all these reports of its alleged tax evasion, and it says that they are speculative reports, but the markets were certainly not convinced. Upon the commencement of the tax raids on Hero MotoCorp, its share price fell, and it tanked even further upon the reports of tax evasion by the company and by its management. That gets us to a very interesting comparison between these raids that take place and their findings. The income tax raids these days, according to us, can fall under three broad categories, namely those against opponents of the government for political vendetta and fixing, as in the case of the Maharashtra ministers. Second, those against corporates and taxpayers to detect tax evasions with no political purpose or angle, as in the case of the raid on Hero MotoCorp. And the third, raids against those who have violated or defrauded the system, such as the raids on bank fraudsters like ABG Shipyard, etc. While the common findings in all these raids are tax evasion, money laundering, benami assets, bogus financial statements, shell companies, accommodation entries, bogus expenses, siphoning of funds, assets abroad, etc. What is of interest is the differing features that come in these three categories of raids, which is raids on politicians, raids on corporates that have evaded taxes, and raids on those who have defrauded the system. The differences in the findings in the tax raids on these three categories, which is opposition politicians, corporates and taxpayers with no political involvement, and on fraudsters who have duped the system, to us are many, and let's discuss them. The first difference has to do with the source of funds. The source of funds involved in tax evasion, which led to the tax raids in the case of politicians. In this case, the funds are generally derived from corruption and misuse of authority while they were in power, and they are certainly in the nature of proceeds of crime. In the case of corporates, the funds involved in tax evasion are generally derived from actual legitimate income and sales, and they are generally not in the nature of proceeds of crime, as we see in the likes of Hero MotoCorp. And in the case of fraudsters, these are cases where bank and public funds have been siphoned away by these tax evaders, by these criminals, and thus the underlying funds here, which have been involved in tax evasion, constitute a proceed of crime. The second one has to do with the object of evasion, as we call it, which is black to white and vice versa. In the case of politicians, since the source of funds of the politicians is illegal, they seek to legitimize it, and thus it is often a case of black money being converted into white here, either through money laundering or through front entities to legalize the illegal money that they have generated. In the case of corporates, it is white money or legal money being converted into black money or illegal money, resulting in the creation of undisclosed and hidden assets and investments by them. In the case of fraudsters, they siphon away bank money, and so it is the case of white money being converted into black, basically converted into loot, since they seek to hide all these ill-gotten gains of theirs. Further, politicos seek to legitimize illegal funds and bring them on the surface. The corporates, on the other hand, that evade taxes do the reverse and thus hide the funds that they have generated in tax evasion. And so is the case with fraudsters who siphon away funds and hide it through various modes. Those politicos who seek to legitimize their funds tend to book bogus income, while in the case of tax evasion by fraudsters and corporates, it is bogus expenses that are booked and not bogus income. The modus operandi in the case of politicos tends to be that of booking income and taking accommodation entries in order to give a legal garb or facade to their funds that they have generated, while in the case of corporates and fraudsters, it involves bogus payments and expenses and benami assets also. In the matter of conduct of raids, those on politicos are politically sensitive, and the Income Tax Department has been seeking security of the central police forces like of the CRPF of late, which is not so in the case of corporates and fraudsters. And finally, to us, tax evasion is the easiest to detect in the case of these fraudsters. It can be relatively difficult in the case of politicos unless they have been reckless and they have taken their power for granted, and thus they did not keep proper records or did not have proper schemes, which they very often do. And detection can be very difficult in the case of large corporates like Hero Motocorp, who tend to do it in a very planned manner. The larger picture, of course, is that the original source of money is the key differentiating factor leading to different findings in these three categories of tax raids, which is on the politician, on the corporate, and on the fraudster. But the common theme in all of them is that it is all a matter of greed and willingness to evade the law, which they all indulge in, all three of them. The net result is that they evaded the taxes and they should be punished. This is Akhilesh Bhargav signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.